the whisper that saved a king. The vampire king came home early on a night that smelled wrong. Not wrong like blood gone sour or wards cracked by careless magic, but wrong in the way silence tightens before a scream. The palace of Noctur had always greeted its sovereign with ritual. Torchlight blooming along the corridors, guards striking spear butts in unison, the soft rustle of courtiers preparing their masks. Tonight, the doors opened onto darkness so complete it swallowed sound. Drysen Ravenholt stepped across the threshold, expecting ceremony, receiving shadow. A hand clamped over his mouth. It was small, calloused, shaking, and it dragged him backward with a strength born of terror. The world snapped into sharp edges, the bite of linen against his cheek, the dust of a storage closet, the frantic thud of a heart inches from his ribs. He could have broken the grip with a thought. He had ruled 4 centuries, outlived wars and buried empires. Instead he stilled. The woman pressed close, breath fluttering. "Stay silent," she whispered, words torn thin by fear. "Please." Through the slats of the closet door, torchlight passed like a blade. Voices followed. Laughter first, intimate and careless, then words spoken too freely for walls that had learned to listen. Drysen recognized them. He would have known them anywhere. His queen's laugh poured like wine. His brother's voice answered, eager, hungry. "She's already doubled the dose," the brother murmured. "He won't question anything by the new moon." Cold Silk replied. "Good. He's lasted longer than I expected." The word struck with a clarity sharper than pain. Every dizzy spell, every trembling hand he dismissed as age. The ritual wine lifted in devotion by the same hands that now plotted his unmaking. Poison served with a kiss. Treason dressed as loyalty. The maid, because now he saw the uniform in the dim, the pale apron, the threadbare hem, did not wait for him to shatter. When the torchlight moved on, she pulled him deeper into the palace's forgotten arteries. Servant tunnels he had never known existed swallowed them whole, the air tasting of dust and secrets older than his reign. "Don't call your guard," she hissed when his hand twitched toward the sigil ring. "Your captain answers to her brother now. Calling them signs your execution." Authority, the kind that had never failed him, curdled into liability. He let her strip him of it piece by piece. The ring clattered into a drain. The ceremonial cloak was shoved behind a rotting beam. The relic blade, passed through generations, wrapped in kitchen rags like common cutlery. Each removal peeled away an identity he'd mistaken for invincibility. They slipped out as bells began to toll, a false alarm he realized sickly, a narrative being written for his disappearance. By the time the city swallowed them, the palace already glowed behind them like a jeweled trap. Her room in the servants' quarter was impossibly small. Thin walls. One candle. The scent of bread and desperation. It was the only sanctuary left to him. The poison burned. Fever climbed his spine. His vision blurred. She pressed a cool cloth to his brow, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Stay with me, your majesty," she murmured. "No pity. Only resolve." "Why?" he rasped when breath returned. "Why risk everything for a king who had never seen her?" She did not look away. "Because no one deserves to die in their own home while monsters call it loyalty." By morning the fever eased. The horror sharpened. Memory became a blade. The council sessions where his head swam. The gentle hand that guided the chalice to his lips. The concern that had sounded like love. He sat upright with a chipped clay cup and understood the arithmetic of betrayal with brutal precision. "I built my throne on people measuring it for my brother," he whispered. "You trusted," she said, anchoring him with a palm on his shoulder. "That's not a crime. Staying blind would be." Something shifted. Purpose cut through grief like dawn through fog. "If they wanted me weak," he said, rising on unsteady legs, "they chose the wrong ending." Footsteps answered him. She moved first, snuffing the candle, pulling him toward a seam in the wall that opened to a passage so narrow his shoulders scraped stone. Torchlight bloomed behind them. Orders snapped. The hunt had begun. He tried to summon his guard. Silence answered. "They changed the oaths," she said softly. 3 weeks ago. While you slept." The truth fell like earth on a coffin. His protectors had been rebound. His authority erased in ceremony while poison clouded his judgment. Hunger tore through him then, not the polite hunger of ritual, but the feral need that defined his kind. The poison severed his control, his balance. He staggered. "You can't feed here," she said, fear finally flickering, not of him but for him. "The moment you're seen they'll call you mad." He growled, the sound wrong in his throat. She stepped closer instead of away. "Look at me," she commanded. "Not the blood. Me. The words mattered. His breathing slowed. She produced a small vial, stolen, preserved. He drank humiliation like medicine. Outside, whispers moved faster than truth. The king fled. Gone mad. Tried to kill the queen. His legacy dissolved into rumor as palace guards in borrowed colors hunted their sovereign. They reached a lane the city forgot, Hollow Crown, where buildings leaned like conspirators and conversation died. A house waited at the end, vines spiraled too deliberately to be wild. This place has a name, she said. Where the first king's heart was shattered. Inside, dust hung in moonlight. Beneath decay lay grandeur, sigils older than his palace, protection woven into stone. Blood memory stirred in his chest, recognizing something long buried. She knelt by a woman ringed with ward stones, unconscious but breathing. Ordinary. Unmarked. Yet guarded more fiercely than the royal vaults. Who is she? He whispered. The maid's voice carried the weight of secrets past where power never listened. The truth, she said. And the reason they tried to erase you. Outside, the hunt closed in. And for the first time in 4 centuries, the vampire king understood that survival would require more than power, it would require learning to see. The king without a crown. The city did not recognize him. That realization hurt more than the poison. Drysen Ravenholt moved through the narrow streets wrapped in borrowed shadows, his posture altered by exhaustion and necessity. No bowed heads. No instinctive fear. No reverent distance. The people passed him as they passed everyone else. Vendors shouting prices, children darting between carts, lovers arguing over crumbs of bread. He had ruled these streets with ink and decree for 400 years, yet not one soul looked twice at him now. Power, he learned in silence, only existed when it was seen. The maid, Mira, she finally told him her name, guided him with the confidence of someone who had learned survival where attention meant danger. She knew which alleys swallowed sound, which taverns changed guards at dawn, which corners belonged to the desperate and which to the cruel. Every step stripped another illusion from him. By the time they reached the abandoned tannery near the river, the city was awake with rumor. They're saying you murdered the queen, Mira said quietly as she barred the door behind them. That you fled when the guards tried to stop you. Drysen laughed once, sharp and broken. Of course they are. The tannery stank of rot and old iron. It was safe only because no one who valued their lungs came near it. Mira set him on a crate and checked the wards she'd scratched into the walls with chalk and ash, crude, imperfect, but layered with intent. You shouldn't know this magic, he said. She didn't look up. Servants see what scholars overlook. We clean ritual rooms after the powerful leave. We hear prayers whispered when crowns are removed. The poison surged again. His hunger clawed, more violent than before. He turned his face to the wall, ashamed of the animal need ripping through him. I won't let you become what they want, Mira said firm. She cut her palm without ceremony and held it out. Drink enough to live. No more. The restraint in her offering, the trust, nearly undid him. He fed with control carved from desperation, and when he pulled back, shaking, he wept without sound. A king reduced to gratitude for mercy. Outside boots pounded. Orders barked. They hid as guards swept the tannery, torches slicing the dark. Drysen listened to his own name used like a curse. Monster. Madman. Usurper. His brother's voice carried authority now, rehearsed and confident. They will not stop, he whispered when the patrol passed. They will erase me. Mira met his gaze. Then stop trying to be the king you were. The words cut deeper than insult. He wanted to argue. Centuries of rule rose to defend themselves, but memory answered first. He saw the council chambers where voices like hers never reached the table. The rituals he'd never questioned because they worked. The servants who learned the palace's bones because the palace never learned their names. What would you have me be? He asked. Alive, she said. And listening. They moved again at dusk, crossing districts where hunger lived openly. Drysen saw children with veins too thin, elders selling blood to survive. He had signed edicts regulating the trade, proud of their balance. Now he saw the cracks, how rules bent under hunger, how enforcement spared the rich. A woman collapsed in the street, drained. Guards stepped over her. Drysen reached out and stopped himself. Intervention would mean exposure. Mira felt the tremor in him. Remember this, she said softly. Not to punish yourself. To change something when you can. They reached Hollow Crown Lane again, slipping into the house where the first king's heart had broken. Inside, the ward stones around the sleeping woman pulsed brighter as Drysen entered, answering something in his blood. Her eyes opened. They were old. Older than the palace. older than the crown. Valor's echo, she said, voice like leaves over stone. You're late. Mira bowed, reverent. Saren Finch, she said. He's been poisoned. Saren's gaze flicked to Mira with warmth, and to Drysan with a severity that stripped him bare. Poisoned kings come here when lies eat them alive. Few survive humility. I don't need judgment, Drysan said hoarsely. I need my kingdom. Saren smiled, thin and sad. You never owned it. She told them the truth the palace had buried. The crown was never meant to rule alone. It was bound to the unseen, the servants, the watchers, the keepers of quiet magic. When Valor broke that covenant, his heart shattered, and the kingdom learned to survive without honesty. They tried to kill you, Saren said, because your blood still remembers the covenant. And because your brother does not. Outside, the hunt tightened. Inside, Drysan felt something awaken, not power but responsibility. What must I do? He asked. Saren's eyes softened. Become small enough to be many. The answer terrified him. But the city was already changing him. The power of the unseen. The city learned his face by rumor long before it ever saw him again. Drysan Ravenholt became a cautionary tale whispered over bread and cheap wine. A mad king, a monster unbound, a tyrant finally revealed. Each lie spread with frightening efficiency, carried by guards who had traded oath for comfort, by nobles who benefited from a throne emptied of conscience. Drysan listened from the shadows and said nothing. Saren Finch insisted he learn before he acted. Kings rushed to correct the story, she told him as dawn thinned the dark. Rulers who survive learn to change the ending. The house on Hollow Crown Lane became a sanctuary for the forgotten. Not because it was hidden, but because no one powerful believed anything valuable could exist there. Drysan watched as people arrived quietly. A night baker with burned scars, a midwife whose clinic had been shuttered by false charges, a former guard dismissed for refusing an illegal order. Mira greeted each by name. They were the city's bones. You kept records, Drysan realized one night as Saren laid out ledgers bound in cracked leather. Names. Dates. Payments that never reached their destination. Orders rewritten after signatures dried. We keep truths, Mira corrected gently. Because lies are loud. The poison left him slowly, but its echo remained. Hunger still lurked, and with it, the temptation to force solutions with strength alone. Each time, Mira grounded him, not with fear but with expectation. You promised to listen, she reminded him once when rage sharpened his fangs. Listening is harder. They trained him to move unseen. Not in the way assassins do but in the way servants survive, how to stand where eyes slide past, how to let importance drain from posture, how to hear rooms breathe. Drysan learned the palace from the underside, the routes no map marked, the signs scratched by hands that cleaned blood no one acknowledged. Meanwhile, Alaric crowned himself regent. The ceremony was rushed, incomplete. Saren smiled when the news arrived. A throne taken too quickly never sits right. Drysan felt the pull of confrontation burn in him. He wanted to tear down lies with truth spoken from a balcony. Saren stopped him with a single raised finger. Justice shouted is still noise, she said. You will let them indict themselves. The opportunity came from the most predictable place, hunger. Alaric's policies tightened blood access, hoarding reserves for loyal houses. The city suffered. Black markets bloomed. People vanished. Mira brought Drysan to the river district where bodies washed ashore pale and empty. Remember this, she said again. They did more than remember. The unseen network moved. Bakers hid messages in loaves. Laundresses passed notes and folded linens. Former guards rerouted patrols. Drysan signed nothing. Ordered nothing. He listened and consented. When the blood vault was exposed as empty, panic rippled through the court. Alaric accused rivals. Seraphine accused servants. Arrests followed. The wrong people were dragged away. Drysan stepped into the open then, not as a king but as a witness. He appeared at a public tribunal in simple clothes, face uncovered, posture unremarkable. Laughter broke out. Guards surged. Saren's wards flared. Mira spoke, not loudly but clearly, naming dates, names, amounts. Ledgers were produced. Witnesses stepped forward. The crowd leaned in. Truth, spoken by many, did not need a crown. Alaric tried to command the guards. They hesitated. Some dropped their spears. Odes remembered their original words. Drysan said nothing until the silence belonged to him. I am alive, he said simply. And I have been listening. The crowd answered. Not with cheers. With relief. A crown remade. The palace doors opened without ceremony. No trumpets. No banners. No rehearsed awe. Drysen Ravenholt walked through the gates of Noctur at dawn wearing plain black, his hands empty, his posture unarmed. Behind him came no army, only people. Bakers with flour on their sleeves. Midwives with tired eyes. Former guards who had learned what their oaths were actually meant to protect. Servants who had spent their lives invisible, now walking openly into the heart of power. The palace had never been prepared for this kind of invasion. Alaric waited in the Hall of Ascension, surrounded by what remained of his loyalists. The throne loomed behind him, heavy with stolen authority. Seraphine stood at his side, pale and furious, her elegance sharpened into something brittle. "You dare return?" Alaric spat. "After fleeing like a coward?" Drysan looked at him, not with hatred, but with a clarity that made the lie collapse under its own weight. "I didn't flee," he said calmly. "I was erased." Laughter rippled among the nobles. Seraphine raised her chin. "You expect us to believe the word of a disgraced tyrant over the stability we've restored?" Mira stepped forward before Drysan could answer. She did not bow. She spoke. She named the poison. The altered oaths. The falsified decrees. The missing blood reserves. Saren's ledgers were carried in and placed on the marble floor, opened for all to see. Witnesses followed, some trembling, some furious, all undeniable. Alaric shouted orders. The guards did not move. For the first time, Drysan saw fear bloom in his brother's eyes, not of power but of accountability. "This is treason," Alaric snarled. "Yes," Drysan agreed. "It is." The words settled differently when spoken without rage. Saren stepped from the shadows then, her presence bending the air like remembered thunder. "The covenant was broken long before tonight," she said. "But it can be repaired." She turned to Drysan. "Not with force." Drysan nodded. He faced the hall. "I ruled believing silence meant peace," he said. "I believed distance meant fairness. I was wrong." The nobles shifted, uncomfortable. "I will not reclaim this crown unless it is changed." A murmur rose. "The throne will no longer rule alone," Drysan continued. "No decree will pass without witness. No guard will swear to blood alone. No servant will be unseen." He turned to Mira. "Kneel," someone shouted from the crowd. Mira did not. Drysan removed the crown from the throne himself and held it, not above his head but between his hands. "I will wear this," he said, "only if she stands beside me." Silence. Then something unprecedented happened. The people knelt. Not to the crown. To the truth. Alaric tried to flee. He made it 3 steps before guards. Real guards, bound to the original words, stopped him. Seraphine screamed as the hall closed in, her silk finally stripped of its protection. Justice was not swift. It was thorough. Days later, Drysan stood on the balcony at dawn. The city looked different when seen without illusions. Mira stood beside him, not behind. "You could have ruled as you were," she said quietly. "I would have died that way," he answered. The crown settled onto his head, lighter than it had ever been. Because it was no longer carried alone.